Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thanks so much for taking a chance to join us. We are going to give everyone a minute or two to join, so feel free to grab a glass of water, get settled, and we'll start in just a couple of minutes. All right, looks like we have a good stream of folks who are joining us right now. While we're waiting for everyone else to join, would love for everyone to hop into the chat and tell us where you're joining us from today, what institution you're at. All right, looks like we have a few people typing into the chat. Western New England University, wonderful. Where else is everyone else joining us from today? Illinois College, great. It's Harcum College. Love to see where everyone's joining us from. All right, looks like we got some folks from Colorado, Ohio, really all over the place. Love seeing this geographic diversity. All right, we'll give it just about another 30 seconds or so for any stragglers to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and get things kicked off today. I want to do a quick round of introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content strategy here at CourseDog. So thinking about all things research and content related. So really excited to be speaking with all of you today about program maps. And I'll let Claire introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire. I'm a product manager here at CourseDog. Just wanted to share a little bit into how I got into the space. I initially became very interested in the higher education space and the challenges that we'll talk about today when I was in college myself. I came in, had no idea what I wanted to study, and only took my first computer science class my second year, which is what I ended up majoring in. And from then on, it was a constant struggle to figure out my path to graduation based on the courses that would be offered and when, so that I would meet all the requirements in the right order. And that's really when I started to learn more about the behind the scenes and why I then joined CourseDog in our mission to break down barriers to student success. So very excited to talk to you all today. And I think we'll have a great webinar here.
Awesome, thanks, Claire. Well, before we really dive into the meat of things today, I wanted to provide a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. So first, I really want to set the stage and talk about some of the urgencies that are really driving institutions to increasingly focus on developing and implementing program maps. Then we'll talk a little bit about how institutions should be approaching course selection for these maps and how to identify any barriers that may exist. Next, we'll spend some time going over why schedule optimization is important to promote course accessibility, particularly when it comes to some of those underserved student populations really being able to effectively use those program maps. And finally, we'll talk about some of the elements that institutions should be considering when it comes to creating and actually advertising the curricula that's part of your program maps. I'll also note that we'll be conducting a few polls throughout today's session, so really looking forward to getting everyone's perspective on this topic and learn about how your institution is approaching this. And we'll also have a Q&A at the end. Feel free to drop any questions that you may have throughout the presentation into either the chat function or the Q&A function, and then we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. And did want to answer one question that we commonly get up front. Yes, we will be sending the recording and the deck to you all after this, so you'll certainly have that to reference if you'd like that. All right, well, let's get into things. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at some of the pressures and challenges that are driving institutions to focus on program maps. We'll talk about student credit production, some of the challenges when it comes to program and course selection for students, and how program maps ultimately aim to address these challenges. So I think it's important to first start off by discussing why are we talking about program maps today? I think everyone here can agree that we want more students to finish their programs and finish their programs on time. And the number of students that the number of credits that a student takes in their first year is a strong indicator of if a student will complete their program on time. However, the data on this slide here really demonstrates how far we still have to go. Across the board, students aren't taking enough credits to finish their degrees on time. And while there are definitely some variations across institutional segments, we all still really have our work cut out to do here. On the left, the average credit hours taken by all students in their first year paints an alarming picture. However, on the right, it's even more concerning if you look at the number of credit hours taken by Pell Grant students in their first year. If you look at the comparisons at two-year institutions, only 12% of all first-year students take 30 credits, and just 9% of Pell Grant students take 30 credits in their first year. At four-year institutions, excluding those research ones, 31% of all students take 30 credits in their first year, while just 26% of Pell Grant students at those same institutions take 30 credits. So I think this is concerning for a number of reasons, but certainly one of them is why we're talking about how we can align our curriculum with program maps today. So what's the root cause that really led institutions to focus on developing program maps? To simply put it, many students are overwhelmed by options. Not only do students have to choose from a bewildering array of courses, but these choices can often feel somewhat random. Students struggle to see how courses cohesively come together and lead to outcomes such as attaining certain skills, landing a job in a certain field, or maybe even transferring to a four-year institution. Students also often have little guidance on how to navigate the multitude of options that they have to choose from. And first generation and underserved students are particularly suffering from the consequences of this.
Now, a lot of us know this to be anecdotally true, but let's look at what the data says on how students feel about program and course completion. We recently came across these results from a survey that Illusion conducted of over 1,000 students in the US. And as you can see, the results were pretty telling. Around 2/3 of students felt overwhelmed by the process of selecting a major. Now, what's even more striking is that when broken down by age, 63% of millennials reported feeling overwhelmed, and 68% of Gen Zers reported feeling overwhelmed when it came to major selection. Now, when it came to seeing the connection between their academic program and career path, 1/3 of surveyed students were unsure which program aligned with their chosen career path. And again, younger students in the Gen Z group especially were most unsure of that connection, as only 60% of Gen Z students were confident in their program choice. Now, I think this is concerning because we know that changing programs can have detrimental repercussions for students. It can have consequences such as needing to take extra courses, delayed completion, and increased tuition. The same survey actually found that 39% of students that changed programs during the course of their degree had to take additional courses, and 28% of them expected their completion date to be delayed by 2 or more semesters. And this just has to do with program selection. We haven't even gotten to course selection yet. Now, you'll see some similar themes here, but now around course selection, as students aren't always sure about what courses they need to take within that major that they chose. Here again, 1/3 of students in that same survey reported that course requirements for their given program were not clear to them. And similarly, 1 in 4 students said that prerequisites were not clear, which is what informs the order in which you need to take those courses. So clearly, I think we can agree that something isn't quite working if this many students have trouble understanding which courses they need to take. Now, enter program maps. And just so we're all aligned, these program maps can sometimes be called academic pathways, program pathways, as well as 4-year or 2-year plans based on the institution. These are part of an effort aimed at simplifying student choice making the connection to learning outcomes, and providing students with support. Now, the overarching idea is that rather than providing students with what some refer to as a cafeteria style of course options, students are now presented with a tasting menu to select their course from. So, for example, when students are deciding between which courses to take or program to enroll in, they're also now given concrete example of learning outcomes. They're able to see what program completion will lead to, whether that is employment, transferring, or continuing on to another credential. Finally, institutions following models that align with this guided pathways reform aim to provide students with support every step of the way. This includes not only helping students choose and enter a program, but also helping them navigate course selection for each term, assisting them with developing a personalized academic program, and providing career support along the way. Now, let's look at how program maps are organized. Before we dive into some of the specific practices around aligning your curriculum with program maps, just want to make sure that we're on the same page with our terminology here. And so here we help break down how some institutions choose to organize their program maps. From a bird's eye view, program maps are often organized under broad umbrellas known as meta majors. And so these meta majors are a collection of academic programs that fall into the same general field, such as business, health sciences, or education. These meta majors are easy to understand from an outsider's perspective, a prospective student, a parent, etc. Now, while not all institutions do organize their programs under meta majors, we thought it was still important to highlight here, because surveys have found that students across the board say that meta majors are helpful. Overall, 59% of students feel this way, including 62% at two-year institutions, 59% at four-year publics, and 53% at four-year privates. Now, on the right, you can see that within a meta major usually lives a collection of programs. These are the traditional academic programs that we all know and that a student will eventually receive their credential in upon completion. So during today's session, we'll be referring to maps at this program level and not focusing as much on the creation of the meta majors.
Thanks, Claire. That was all super helpful and I think really important context to set the stage of what we'll be talking about today. So now that we've kind of set the stage with all of that, I wanted to spend some time talking about how we can use data to align our curricula and identify barriers that may be currently living within our curriculum as it's currently organized. And specifically, we'll look at which courses should be included in program maps and types of hidden barriers to look out for when it comes to creating program maps. So I know the process of deciding which courses to include in a program map can definitely be a really overwhelming process. For GE courses alone, one study I read found that community colleges on average require students to select about a dozen courses from a mixed bag of 162 approved courses to meet general education requirements. So this is a lot for anyone to go through, a student or administrator. So to help make sense of where to start here, we should definitely be looking at those non-negotiables first. At the top of the slide, you'll see some considerations in order from most to least stringent. Obviously, accreditation requirements and transfer requirements will guide which courses are non-negotiable. From there, it's important to examine recommendations made by local employers or any industry councils or advisory boards that you may have. And then, of course, existing completion requirements that your institution can also help provide a framework to work off of. I think what's more interesting here, though, at least to me personally, are the considerations to select courses that will promote student-centric outcomes. For example, as we were just saying, many institutions have hundreds of general education courses that students can choose from. When deciding which ones to include in a program map, institutions should examine past student success in those GE courses that you're considering. This might include looking at transcripts of alumni that have successfully completed the program, examining DFW rates, completion rates, or the number of attempts it took students to successfully complete the course. And next, including courses in the first term and year that can be easily transferred to other programs. And this is especially key if you're looking at programs within the same meta major. By shepherding students into courses that can count towards multiple programs, students have more time to explore interests. And if they do decide to switch their program, they won't have taken those courses for nothing and fall behind. I was reading a study the other day by two professors at Kansas State that highlighted just how many students actually do change their program. The study found that 50% of students at community colleges entering STEM programs either changed their programs or left the program altogether. This was also true for 57% of students entering health sciences programs and 45% of students entering social and behavioral sciences programs. And this isn't the only study that has found this. The same study that Claire was referencing earlier by Lucian found some similar trends. In their study, they found that 51% of students changed their major at least once. And finally, we want to make sure that students have early exposure to discipline courses that allow them to gauge their fit within the program. It gives them an opportunity to see if their interests and strengths align with the program they intend to complete. And I think that's especially important for programs that have requirements to even get accepted into that program in the first place, such as nursing or health sciences programs that have some more stringent requirements. These guidelines for deciding which courses to include are a helpful starting point, but I think it's also equally important to be looking at what shouldn't be included in these program maps. So I know that creating program maps is quite a process, but I think it's also a really exciting opportunity to identify barriers or hidden requirements that may have previously flown under the radar. Starting on the left, the program mapping process is a great opportunity to identify courses that are rarely or maybe even never offered. Once these courses are identified, institutions are then able to remove them from the catalog and cut down on the number of options that students are presented with. Next, this might be an opportunity to identify courses that haven't been looked at in a while and perhaps no longer meet industry standards. These courses may either need to be updated or in some cases, maybe even discontinued. On the top, hidden prereqs. I think this is a really big one. If students are unaware of certain courses that serve as prereqs in order to progress, they may not even be able to register for the next batch of courses they need to take. It's only until they actually attempt to register for the preceding required course that they find out they're ineligible and may need to pause their progression until they can complete that prereq. Prereq courses should also be publicly noted in all areas where students may access curriculum and program requirements, including the catalog, the website, or degree planning tools. The next, courses that can count for both GE and program requirements. I really love this one because I think it's a win-win. If students are aware of a course that will count towards two requirements, they can stay on track for timely completion and avoid taking potentially unnecessary credits. And finally, we have here elective courses that aren't eligible for transfer requirements. This is a tricky one. Institutions should examine transfer requirements for other institutions within their state higher education system or institutions that their students commonly transfer to, and ensure that elective students complete will actually count towards those transfer requirements. If an elective won't count towards those transfer requirements, students should be able to know this up front so they don't take the course and then find out later only that they need to take another course, again, potentially delaying them. All right, so I know that was a lot of talking there. So would love to hear from you all and talk about some of the barriers that you may find at your own institution when you've been going through the program mapping process. I know that there are many different barriers here, so feel free to go ahead and select multiple if there's something that you've come across. And we'll leave this open for about 60 seconds or so to give folks a chance to send in their answers. All right, looks like we have some answers coming in. Looks like a few folks still haven't participated. If you want to go ahead and send in your answers now. All right, we'll keep it open for just a few more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and share those results with everyone. All right, it looks like we have the answers here. All right, pretty interesting here. It looks like there were a few that really rose to the top. Particularly, students are unaware of courses that count towards GE and program requirements. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, that's something that's so important to students, yet they may have no idea about that in the first place. Looks like we also have hidden prereq courses, and then courses listed are rarely offered. Yeah, I think we hear that from institutions all the time. You know, there was maybe one professor who taught this course. They ended up leaving the institution, but for some reason that course is still listed in the catalog. Claire, do you have any thoughts here about these results?
I mean, those make sense that those would stand out there. I think those are the ones that we've seen most common. So yeah, great to see that it resonates with people.
All right, great. So, well, thanks everyone for your participation there. We'll have a few more polls throughout, but want to move on to the next section, and that's talking about schedule optimization to promote pathway accessibility. And this is a topic that we're really passionate about here at CourseDog. We know just how important the schedule is when it comes to students getting into the courses they need. So we'll talk a little bit about some course access considerations for underserved student groups. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the value that can be seen in block scheduling. And then we'll also talk about scheduling metrics you should be examining to ensure that all students are able to access the courses they need to stay on track. I think the quote on this slide does a really good job of exemplifying why program map creation within itself isn't enough to keep students on track. So Davis Jenkins, he's out of the Community College Research Center at Columbia. He noted that while program maps and meta majors do provide better information, it doesn't necessarily change the student experience. And this is why we're going to be spending some time talking about scheduling, because we know that to even make the program maps effective, students need to be able to get into those courses. I think it's no secret that when we're talking about course accessibility, you know, it certainly impacts all students, but it definitely has a disproportionate impact on our student groups that are most underserved. I know we could probably spend all day talking about this slide, so I'll just go over a couple of examples here, particularly ones that I've heard from administrators when talking to them about their course schedule. I know many administrators are worried about employed students being able to access the courses they need while also balancing their jobs. Will these students be able to take all the courses they need either before or after they go to work? Many of these students really can't afford to be on campus all day and have their courses spread out over 7-8 hours. Other students may be disproportionately impacted by scheduling errors. For example, if 2 required courses are accidentally scheduled at the same time, students may then be forced to choose between courses as a result and not be able to take a full load of courses. This can definitely impact students that need to maintain a certain load to qualify for their financial aid. Similarly, if a course with variable units is marked incorrectly, students may find out only after they've registered for the course that they won't actually receive the number of course credits that they expected. And I know that these errors may not happen often, but when they do, they can have large ramifications for our underserved students. I know the slide also doesn't even begin to cover all the various student groups that we could talk about when it comes to course access. I've talked with administrators that have expressed concern over course access for students that may commute home on the weekends, that are gap year students, or maybe they're student athletes. There's a lot we could talk about here. So with that being said, I wanted to focus on just a few of the student groups I know are particularly impacted by the course schedule. So first, students with children or students that are caretakers. These students often have time constraints due to caretaking responsibilities, and they need to be able to complete their courses during school hours. Institutions with large populations of caretakers should consider questions such as how far away are local K through 12 schools from campus, what time are those schools in sessions, and if those schools or local organizations offer childcare before or after school. For example, I was recently talking to an administrator and she was telling me that many of their students have children that go to the local schools. In an effort to accommodate this large population of students, they're introducing scheduling bans that allow students to take all classes they need between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And then after those classes finish up at 2 p.m., they'll have enough time to go over and pick up their kids from school. Employed students are another population that we know have time constraints when it comes to taking their classes. Institutions should be thinking about what industries their students work in, major employers in those industries in their local communities, and hours of operation. For example, if students commonly work in retail and hospitality, these industries usually need more workers in the afternoons and evenings. Next, thinking about students that rely on public transportation to get to your campuses. I think there are a lot of important questions to ask here, such as, do courses begin, say before the first bus arrives? Do courses end after the last public transportation option leaves? And if a bus doesn't arrive frequently at night, will these students have a safe place to wait after their course ends? Finally, low-income students. I think that this is another really critical student population to be thinking about. Institutions need to be thinking more holistically about how course access and timing also relates to other services that these students may rely on. So, for example, can students easily access technology labs or tutoring services before or after their scheduled classes? And will cafeterias or food carts be open or near where these courses are offered? I also want to note that course accessibility can also be helped or hindered by the type of guidance available to students. And I think this is particularly important when we're thinking about the transfer student population. Selecting and enrolling in the correct courses can quite literally make or break it for these students if they're able to transfer to their chosen institution. And then once they transferred, if they'll actually be able to fulfill all those necessary course requirements for completion. The data on this slide just highlights how important that is. Before transferring, 2/3 of students said that they could use more advice on which courses are eligible for transfer. And this is really just half the battle when it comes to transferring. 64% of students that have already actually transferred to a four-year institution said they could use more advice on which courses to take to fulfill major graduation requirements. And similarly, 59% of transferred students at four-year institutions say they could use more advice on which courses are eligible for transfer credit. The data on this slide certainly demonstrates a need for increased course guidance to set students up for success. So I know we just spent a lot of time talking about different student groups that can be impacted by the schedule. So would love for you all to select which group you are most concerned about when it comes to course access. I know that most of you are probably concerned about all of these student groups, so would love for you to select the top group that comes to mind for you when it comes to scheduling at your institution. Similar to the last poll, we'll leave this open for about 60 seconds. So would love for you all to go and vote on this poll question. All right, looks like the responses are coming in. We'll leave it open for another 15 seconds or so for any folks that haven't had a chance to participate yet. All right, we can probably go ahead and close the poll. Okay, great. So it looks like these results are live here. Okay, very interesting to see the results that we had come in here. It looks like we had a couple groups come in top here. Looks like low income students and students with federal financial aid. Those were definitely top student groups. That makes a lot of sense. We've run this poll in previous webinars, and I think this resonates with a lot of the results that we've seen in the past. Any other thoughts here, Claire, before we move on?
No, I just wanted to call out that someone mentioned first generation college students as well, which is definitely one of those other groups to watch out for when scheduling courses, as well as now female students around caretaking for kids, travel safety, etc. So really interesting additions here. Thank you all for sharing those.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Well, I think we can go ahead and move on then.
Yeah, so now that we just talked about how certain students are more impacted by the course schedule, I now want to talk about some scheduling strategies to ensure that we are meeting these student needs. Now, I'd like to begin and talk a little bit about block scheduling. Block scheduling enables students to take all of the courses they need within a specific time period. For example, a student may take all the courses they need during a preset block of 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the morning or at night, such as 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Now, block scheduling can have many benefits. When asked in a survey, overall 71% of students found value in block scheduling and how it ties into learning communities. Some of those benefits included making it easier to choose classes, saving time registering for courses, as well as creating these instant study groups or learning communities. Now, outside of these benefits found in the survey, it can also help reduce the amount of time students have to spend on campus between classes. As we mentioned earlier, this is particularly important for students with outside responsibilities, such as a job or caretaking, which doesn't give them the luxury or the option of staying on campus all day between classes. So how exactly can we understand student needs and think about how to create a schedule that best serves those needs? There is so much data out there that we can use to help us build a schedule, and that can be overwhelming. And so we'll start by looking at a few metrics that we think are really key when building a schedule. First is course distribution throughout the day and throughout the week. Now, I'm sure you've all experienced pain points here. Classes are often packed between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., and faculty sometimes may be reluctant to teach outside of these hours, even if that is when students might need to take those courses. I was talking with one administrator, and she told me that a student working in her office told her that she couldn't work at all on Tuesday and Thursday. When she asked why, the student said that all the classes they needed to take were only offered in those little blocks on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they were jam-packed in classes all day long. Now, course distribution is also important in the context of program maps. For example, if a student signs up for a program with the expectation that they will take classes at night, all of the courses need to be offered at night as they progress. They certainly should not complete 2 terms only to find out as they attempt to register for the 3rd term that none of the classes that they need are offered at night. Now, courses and section fill rates are another important metric to examine, top right there. Particularly in popular general education courses or milestone courses, institutions should look to see if all the sections offered are consistently at capacity or even have a wait list. This may be an indication that not all students are able to access these courses when they need to. Now, I won't go over each individual data point here, but the questions listed on this slide are a good starting point to see if students can indeed access all the courses they need as they progress along those paths. One that you see here that might also resonate with you right now is around modality, especially with the pandemic that might have impacted your course fill rates between versus online and on-campus courses, and you might need to drill down to that level of detail when deciding how to offer those courses for an upcoming term. Now, for the final section, we're going to walk you through creating and advertising accessible program maps. First, we'll go through some of the essentials to include in program maps outside of just listing course sequences. Next, we'll touch on some accessibility guidelines. And finally, we'll talk about the importance of having consistent information about your program maps, no matter where a student is looking at it. Now, Bridget mentioned this a little bit earlier, but a program map should really be more than just a course list. And that's a common misconception that we've seen as these program maps start to be introduced, is that a lot of people initially think of just a list of courses put on a web page. Now, this is certainly important and one of the major purposes of creating program maps. However, a program map can and should contain more than just a list of courses to really reach that full potential and impact students for the better. First, job information. This is essential to help students see the connection between the program and future employment. Now, very practically, there are many places where you can find that labor market information, and there are great public sources such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or through other labor market analytics providers such as Lightcast, formerly known as MC Burning Glass. Now, I will not say all labor market sources are equal, so definitely make sure that the information you're linking your students to is relevant, accurate, and detailed enough. The other thing is listing recommended minimum grades to help students understand what they need to achieve to have success in the program, or perhaps even being admitted into the program in the first place. Now, highlighting the target audience is something that is often overlooked, but is essential for each program map, especially if a specific program has multiple different maps. So let me give you an example of that. Some institutions choose to build slightly different maps that take into account the different requirements of transfer institutions, for example. And so you might have a student at a California community college who may need to complete different requirements depending on if they are planning to transfer to a CSU or a UC system campus. And so that might require a different program map, and you should clearly highlight who the student persona is intended for with that specific program map. Now, the last item I'll highlight is milestone actions. Most program maps will note key milestone courses that students need to complete, but it's also an opportunity to remind students of milestone actions. And these actions may, for example, include meeting with an advisor before registering for the next term or registering for graduation. Now, we know that these type of actions can be hard to get students to do, so definitely a great opportunity to highlight them in there. So then when they're looking at those courses, they're also looking at those actions and really taking it into account when thinking about their degree progression. Now, obviously, we realize that this can quickly become a lot of information to display in one place. So it is helpful to see how other institutions have structured their program maps to get a feel for different types of formats and really figure out what makes the most sense for your institution. Now, let's talk about making these maps accessible to all students. An essential part of any discussion about accessibility should always include making sure that students of all abilities can access resources built for them. I listed just a few considerations here to make sure that students can access program maps that live online, for example. Now, some of those considerations include making sure that online program maps are compatible with functionalities such as a screen reader, navigation by keyboard, or screen magnification. Now, I'll just note that, especially with the younger generation, your team should absolutely make sure that these functionalities do not only work on desktop navigation, but also on mobile and tablet devices, which is where a lot of your students will likely be looking at that catalog. Now, this can feel like a lot, but to make sure that you aren't missing anything, consider working with your IT office or even your student accessibility office, just to make sure that you're checking those boxes, making sure that you're meeting the most up-to-date standards. All right, we know this is a lot of information and we're almost there. The last thing I want to highlight is that program maps live in more than just one place. So it is key to ensure consistency across location to prevent confusion and to absolutely prevent conflicting information that you're giving to students. Now, I think the catalog is the first place many of us think when we think about where we house our curriculum and program maps to be student facing. The catalog really represents the public contract between the institution and the student for the requirements and policies that they must follow to successfully complete their program. Now, this is absolutely important, but there are also a couple of other places that students access program information. Now, the website is a big one, and that it can be slightly different from the catalog. Students are likely to first do a Google search for what they're looking for before navigating from an institution's homepage in search of that information. And so this website also serves as an advertising tool for prospective students considering your institution and potential programs. So it can be very valuable to include them in your website itself. Now, finally, if your institution uses a student degree planner tool, then that is typically where your students would go to plan their schedule for upcoming terms. And so it's where they chart out their course and create a plan that makes sense for their individual circumstances. And so it's super valuable to have that program map information available right there instead of having them need to go back to the catalog or the website when they're planning that upcoming term. Now, it is really key, as you can imagine, that all three or potentially more that you have of these mediums present the same information to prevent confusion through conflicting information and really make sure that students don't get off track or take unproductive credits. Now, let's talk a little bit about the role that CourseDog plays in the space and the problems that it can help you solve, some of which we just talked about. So our mission is really to break down those barriers to opportunity for students through integrated academic operations. And so I think we all understand that for student success initiatives to be successful on campus, they must be holistic, but your academic operations should be too. And so in our academic operations platform, you can create and manage your whole curriculum, such as your courses, programs, and of course, program maps. Now, that most up-to-date curriculum data then gets directly displayed on a modern student-facing catalog, and you're also able to schedule those courses using our academic and event scheduling tool. And all of those are connected and work seamlessly together. As part of that scheduling tool, you're able to take into account faculty preferences, standard meeting patterns, and any other of those business processes that you might already be using. Now, finally, you're able to leverage reports and predictive analytics. As we mentioned, importance of data-driven scheduling here, including on course demand and course conflicts that uses not only your historical data, but also your degree audit data as well. Now, what's really powerful is that all of this happens together in a user-friendly, easy-to-use platform that seamlessly reads and pushes back to your student information system so that you can really focus on student success. I'll just share very briefly how it can help you get the most out of your program map specifically. So with our interface, it makes it really easy for you to both create and maintain your program maps. Because as you all know, creating them is one thing, and then keeping them up to date as you make those curriculum changes is a whole other beast. And so this allows you to review any changes through a workflow process, to collaborate on those changes and enforce approvals before any of them actually get displayed to students in your catalog. Speaking of that link between curriculum management and catalog, since they're integrated together, it guarantees that data integrity and consistency between your admin-facing side of the curriculum management and what actually gets displayed for your student in the public-facing catalog. Now, something that we didn't quite get to today for time reasons is that we also provide you with course demand projections based on those degree maps to build your schedule in a way to enable students to stay on the fastest track to completion. And so that what's really powerful here is that we help you leverage these program maps, not only to help students figure out what courses they need to take, but also to help you and your institution build a schedule accordingly. And lastly, we provide you with training and best practices from the latest industry research and from our experience working closely with hundreds of institutions to build their curriculum, catalog, and schedule. So with that said, I'll hand it back over to Bridget, and I think we'll take any questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. That was great. Like Claire just said, we are going to move into the Q&A portion of today's webinar. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to drop those into the Q&A function, and then we can answer those live on the line. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to type in any questions that they may have into the Q&A, and then we'll go over them. All right, I did see one question coming here, just asking if we could share some of the surveys and references. I know that they're in very small text at the bottom of the slide. So yes, certainly we will be sending out the deck to everyone, and they have the links to the studies there at the bottom of the slide. If that's difficult, also happy to just send the direct link to folks as well.
I'm also seeing a question around degree maps in our curriculum product. And so as we mentioned, we think of degree maps at the program level. And so under each program, we believe that you should have at least one degree map that you provide for students. And so that is where our degree maps are hosted. And Julie, happy to walk you through that in more detail or follow up over email there. But yeah, so in the curriculum module under each program is where you can build those degree maps if you configure them there.
Awesome, thanks, Claire. It looks like we have another question that just came in that asked if we work with Banner, and if so, what are the requirements to have these two systems working seamlessly together?
Yes, so happy to answer that. We absolutely work with Banner. It's one of the major SISs out there that a lot of institutions use. And so we have a bidirectional integration, so we can read from your SIS and also push data back. So for all the changes that you make in our course doc platform, we wouldn't want them to be lost and for you to have to go manually update them in your SIS. And so most of our fields do get pushed back to your SIS as well. In terms of specific requirements, happy to give you, specific documents outlining all that. It's also in our documentation online, so happy to follow up there and send you those more detailed requirements over email so you can make sure that you meet them.
Awesome. Well, we'll give folks a little more time to chat in any other questions that may have come up. And if you don't have any questions that come to mind right now, obviously feel free to reach out to myself or Claire, and happy to set up a time to discuss any of this more. It looks like we have just about 10 minutes left, so hopefully we can give folks a little bit of time back in their day before they have to jump to the next meeting. But we did want to launch one last final poll here just to find out if any folks are interested in learning more. So yeah, feel free to put that in. We won't be sharing the public results of this poll with everyone, so that'll just be for us to see on the back end. All right, we'll give folks about another 30 seconds or so to just quickly hit yes or no here. And then we can hopefully be on our way. All right, well, we'll leave this poll open for anyone that may be lingering on the webinar, but for anyone else that has already filled out the poll, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this was a really great discussion. Claire and I really enjoyed it, really enjoyed seeing your poll responses, what student groups you're particularly thinking about on our campus. I think that that's always so valuable to think about and have those discussions.
Thank you all.
All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.